This is the Birth, Baby, and Life podcast with Kristen Burgess, and we're exploring deep inside ourselves in episode number 197. Hey mama, today we are going to talk about motherhood as a project, but the end result is not our children. It's a family culture, and perhaps to a deeper extent, it is actually who we are at the end of it all. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Kristen, and I work with pregnant mamas all over the world who want to have a great pregnancy and a natural birth, and mamas who want to intentionally create a beautiful family culture and a happy home full of healthy and happy kids. Like I said, today I want to talk about this concept of motherhood as a project. So I have a lot of notes. You'll probably see me refer to them a lot. The next few podcast episodes are just going to be packed full, and I can't wait to share. And one of the things that we're really focusing on with these podcast episodes is that women are opting out of motherhood, or they're having fewer children. And for many women, they're having fewer children than they actually want to have. Now, in the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about women who choose not to have children at all. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing that babies are at least on your brain somewhat. So with that, we're going to dive into things because really babies are in crisis today. All right. In the past, high infant and even maternal mortality rates threatened mothers and babies. And today we have a much better chance of a healthy pregnancy, babies living and having a healthy childhood and making it to adulthood. Now, I realize that there are some healthcare crises, and we will talk about those in a separate episode. But for the most part, being a mom and a baby is safer today than it was in the past. But today is still a difficult time for babies to be born because, well, babies simply aren't born. Most babies are not conceived at all due to both choice and also to infertility, which we'll tackle in some upcoming podcast episodes as well. Many of them are aborted. The dominant narrative in our very prosperous and well-educated society is that babies are actually a hindrance to a woman's life. So women just aren't having babies. At the end of it all, many women look back and they wish that they'd had a child or that they'd had more. They realized, to just put it in an ineloquent way, that the ship done sailed. And so let's talk a little bit about what's driving that, and especially let's talk about motherhood. Motherhood as a project that is worth taking on. Like, if you don't want to have kids, that's just fine. I'm assuming that you're not listening to this podcast, or maybe if you are, you're kind of weighing. And so in that case, I hope you'll be open to what I share. And listen to that as you weigh your choices. But if you're happy, with your one or two kids, then listen to this podcast with an open mind. I'm not trying to convince you to have more. I will maybe try and do that over the next couple of episodes. But right now, hear me out at least to hear about motherhood and the blessing that can be. Because what I want to give you today is just some thinking points, some talking points in favor of motherhood. A paradigm that doesn't set motherhood as like an interruption or something as less, but instead looks at it as something that really greatly benefits you. Now, for many of you know, I'm a single mother in the wake of abuse at this point, and so there's an organization in my area that is dedicated to helping single moms, and they send out an encouraging text message every week. And so I happened to get the message that they sent out this week yesterday as I was getting the podcast notes ready, and so I'm going to read for you what they sent out as their text encouragement, because I think that it's really applicable to all moms, and I also feel like it really hits to the heart of this podcast episode really well. So it says, "Moms, you are so brave. Motherhood isn't just about raising children. Motherhood is where you yourself are raised up to your highest potential, if you're open to it. You know this is big. You understand how high the calling of motherhood is, and it's beautiful and joyous and amazing. And it's heavy. And every day you show up one more time and try. That's really brave." So again, that's from Single Mom, which is an organization in my area supporting single mamas. They do amazing work. But I feel like that that text message just really hit at the heart of what this podcast episode is. So with that, let's jump into some talking points just to give you a moment to stop and to think. So one of the things that women talk about when they are considering motherhood or becoming mothers again is change. Like, oh, how will it change me? As if somehow it's going to change you from the vibrant, free woman that you are. And what I want to argue is that you're going to change no matter what path you're going to take. You are not going to stay static. If you look at 7-year-old you versus 14-year-old you, you changed a lot. Then if you look at 21-year-old you, you changed a lot. And then at 28-year-old you, I'm sitting here in my early 40s looking back at 7-year-old, 14-year-old, 21-year-old Kristen and thinking, gosh, you've come a long way, baby. So we change, we grow, we learn new things, and there may be some things that tend to stay the same, or you may find that you persistently identify with, say, a set of values across a lot of your lifetime. But the fact of the matter is that you are going to shift and change whether you have children or not. So being afraid, and so I don't necessarily I think women will say, well, it'll change my lifestyle and this, that, and the other, but maybe they're more afraid that they're going to lose something of themselves, because really any choice brings change, and having children will change you. But I think the fear is that having children will change us and it won't be for the better, that it'll be for negative, or having children is going to restrict us in a way from being who we would be if we didn't have that burden. Because again, that's really the implication in society today. And again, we're going to tackle this a lot over the next few podcast episodes, but this implication is that children are a burden. They're a burden on the environment. They're a burden on society. And most especially, the attitude today is that they are a burden on the life of a woman. So that's one of the things that we want to look at and realize when we're talking about motherhood and what it brings to us, is that it's not necessarily an intrinsic burden. Like I think are, we're kind of unique, I guess, culturally and societally in the place that we today view children as a burden. And even if you say, well, I don't see my children as a burden, I think you can look and understand that the meta-narrative is that children are a burden. Because even when we look at progressive thought, so first of all, progressive thought is totally pro-abortion, because you got to kill the children that will hold you back. And then the other narrative, which seems on the surface to be really supportive, which is that we need like universal daycare and universal pre-K and universal this and that and the other, also views children as a burden, because it says we need universally to shuffle children off on the state so that we can get back to living the important part of our lives, right? And they'll couch that in narratives like, oh, we need to make money. But is it really that way? And in a couple podcast episodes, I'm going to talk to you more about that. Is it really the money thing? So again, these are all going to be really knit together. But just to start getting you thinking, to get your brain percolating, consider those. So I want to argue that actually having children will change your life for the better. And I encourage you to at least consider and take a peek through that lens, to consider that motherhood is your greatest project. Your children are not the end result of the project, as I said on the podcast intro. They are not the end result. Remember, you don't control the outcome. It's really interesting because as a business owner, I'm always like looking at small business stuff to help improve the business, to improve my kids and my lives, right? And so one of the things that I've been studying recently is a book called The 12-Week Year. Oh, and I don't remember the author's name right now. I think it's Michael something. I'll put it in the show notes. Anyways, I have been reading the book, The 12-Week Year, and one of the things that they are talking about is that what is important is your actions and being consistent with your actions and that kind of thing, and that you have to realize that you don't control the outcome, but what you control is your actions. And I thought that was really pertinent when thinking about mothering. We don't necessarily control the outcome, i.e. the outcome being how our children turn out. So this is not arguing that mothering is a project and you're going to turn out like perfect kids or whatever. So you don't control that outcome, but you do control your actions. And in a very large way, you control your experience of motherhood and who you become at the end of it, no matter who your unique children are. And I do believe that we are given our children for a reason. Sometimes I wonder, I'm in this interesting point now where I still have little ones, and then I also have adult children, and sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, like how many ways does my heart go, and all these different things. And so motherhood is a big thing, and we have to just realize that we don't control the outcome, but what we do control is us, and in a large extent the culture that we create, which is kind of what we're going to talk about here in this episode. So yeah, the end result is that family culture that you create, the woman that you become. Like, I can't sugarcoat this. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat this at all in this episode or the next few. Mothering is hard, especially if you're intentional about it. Like, there's always some people out there who become parents by default. They get pregnant, they keep the baby, which is a good thing. But then, they're happy. Like, I think the term that my older kids are using is like iPad kids, and I haven't really looked into that yet, but I think that's referring to like this Gen Alpha phenomena of they're always on screens, and like some parents are okay with that. And in all honesty, like, I know that a lot of kids were raised as like TV kids or whatever when I was growing up. I'm happy that my parents set some limits and were like, go outside. And I think they did a good job because even as a kid, where we got to the point where they weren't so much saying, oh, you've got to go out and play, you can't watch TV. Like, I just didn't like watching TV for long periods of time. And so I think, I don't think this is necessarily the screen thing is limited. I mean, I'm of the generation where Game Boys were a thing, and I had a little Game Boy and all this, that, and the other. But I guess it wasn't quite as compelling as they're designing iPads and that sort of thing to be. So I get that there are parents who are just happy for screens to be the babysitters. But I'm going to assume if you're listening to this podcast that is not you. You are an intentional mom. And I just want to raise up the fact that I recognize that does take a lot of work. It is sacrifice. But again, when we look at other things, there's sacrifice. Like, somehow we see sacrificing 60 hours a week of your life to some sort of corporate job. That's a sacrifice that's worth it. And then we have to ask, why, as a society, do we perceive that as worth it, but mothering our children as not worth it, or putting in the hours to be present for them and mother them with intention is not worth it? Is it because the 60-hour-a-week job comes with wealth and prestige? And I mean, I really ponder that, because that's something that's really been hard for me. My business, my business made a solid part-time income back before everything happened. But since going through all of the abuse and the fallout from that, and like trying to pick ourselves back up, I just, it's been hard to focus on the business, and so it doesn't make as much. And so I've really struggled with that. Like, is my worth or self-worth or self-perception defined by the fact that, I'm not making 6 figures a year? It's really tough. It's something that I have struggled with when I look at, like, people tell me that I'm awesome and amazing and strong and wonderful. And there's still that little voice in me that's like, yeah, but you don't make enough money. And so it's like, with this as a society, is that what we value? And I do believe as a society that we should value the contributions that people make, even if they don't make a lot of money. And I think that we should encourage people to make contributions to society through career or volunteering or something like that. Like, I know there's a lot of memes that talk about, like, a person's worth is not defined by their income. And I think, like, they imply that, people are intrinsically worthy even if they're not wage earning people, slaves to the capitalist system, right? And I get a little bit of that vibe. I think there's some limits there. Like, if you're truly sitting around in the basement eating dino nuggies and playing video games all day and not contributing to society, maybe there's a problem there. And I think even when we look at people who have a disability or that sort of thing, are there things that they can do? Yes. So I'm not saying that people should just sit around doing nothing. But again, when we look at it, it's like mothering is certainly not nothing. And many of the creative pursuits that people choose to engage in, I guess, help to better society in a way. Again, if you're stuck in the basement doing something only for you, maybe there's a problem. But really, our worth shouldn't be tied to the amount of money that we make or the amount of corporate prestige that we have. Yet that seems to be what we define worth as, and what we say makes it worth it. Like, because you have something to show for it somehow. But really, motherhood, I mean, if you look at the project of mothering children, it demands so much. And in this point, I'm not talking about the amount of sacrifice and hard work that it demands. Really, I'm talking about like this incredible skill level that motherhood demands. So if we say, somebody's going to get a lot of prestige because they're a powerful attorney, or they're a doctor, and they're a creator, an entrepreneur or something, and they've just, they've contributed so much, they've brought so much, look at their genius, blah, 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 blah. Well, look at moms. Look at the ingenuity, the creativity, everything that you have to put in. Crafting a family culture takes skill, it takes ingenuity, it takes a ton of emotional intelligence. If you think about, like, I think about navigating with my children every single day, right? I've got children at home right now from age 6 to 21 because it's summer and pretty much everybody is here except my oldest, who is doing an internship, and then she'll temporarily be back here for a little bit between jobs. And so it's like, that's a lot of interpersonal relationships when we're talking about 7 or 8 kids, and just kind of having to manage that. In fact, talking about my eldest, I even had to be on the phone with her kind of talking through some things because she and her brother had a text conversation that was difficult. So it's like, there's all this kind of managing of interpersonal relationships and this understanding and continuing education that you need to do on, what is the research about development, about helping raise emotionally healthy children. You have to understand history and understand cultural child rearing practices, because sometimes you need to look back at those and say, what were they doing right that we're doing wrong now that we're following like these experts who are in ivory towers, but you wonder, do they have more than like 0.5 kids themselves, right? So mothering is just, it requires this insane amount of emotional intelligence and research and understanding and study and on the job trying things out and messing up and humbling yourself and trying again. Like, even if we just think about sifting through all of the choices that you have to make as a parent, you have to evaluate all these parenting ideologies. You have to look at the research on child rearing. You have to look at the research on education. You have to look at the research on health. There are just so many things, right? I've been doing this for 23 years now, mothering, and I'm still researching. I'm still learning. I'm still looking at evidence. I'm still looking at science. I'm still looking at history. I'm still asking all of these questions on what does it mean? What is the best way to rear my children? And then learning and kind of having to make adjustments on the fly and in the moment. Like, we went through a really difficult time where we were just in survival mode. And now that we're coming out of that, and I'm looking at my children and seeing what were the effects of that period on them, and how can I give them the best chance at healthy adulthood, given what happened, given the fact that we probably lost a few developmental years there. Like, how do I compensate for that? So, like, what I'm doing is studying, like, when you've got people who are working with populations that are at risk, like child populations that are at risk, what has worked to give those children the most emotional intelligence, the best chances of success, and how can I take that and adapt that for my family? So it just never stops. Like, it never stops when you're a mom. And in this case, I'm saying that's positive because you continue to have to learn, to grow, and to pour your intelligence, your ingenuity, your problem solving into your family and your family's culture. And then you have to craft a home that holds a level of balance. Like, you want to raise children who love your home, who are excited about life, and you also want them to be polite, respectful, helpful, self-controlled. That takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of intention. We used to call this concept homemaking, and like, there's an essence to homemaking that is a lot more than, say, 1950s cleaning schedules. Like, don't get me wrong, I love me reading like some vintage cleaning schedules, and when I've got to get the house whipped into shape, sometimes I'll watch these YouTubers who are testing like old-fashioned cleaning schedules. There's one that I like. She goes through old home economics textbooks and stuff and guidebooks for women and tests the different cleaning schedules. I'll see if I can find her YouTube channel to link to in the show notes because it's just a lot of fun. But anyways, so sometimes I'll pull out one of those and be like, oh, I'm going to use this. But when we talk about homemaking, there is an essence to that is more. And, I think we can see this in some things like Sally Clarkson's book, The Life-Giving Home. is a beautiful, more recent example of this. Edith Schaefer wrote a book on homemaking many decades ago that kind of talks about this essence of homemaking as being something more, and also about your spiritual growth as a mother. We see this in some things like such as Waldorf pedagogy. You see this essence of the mother as like she brings more to the home than just her cleaning and stuff like that. So there's this essence that you carry. And you've probably heard me if you've listened to the podcast before or videos of mine before, because I've said it, like when I was growing up in the South, we talked about if mama ain't happy, ain't no one happy. And that is a really good way to sum up that the fact that a mother holds an essence in the home that is really powerful, and you hold a role in like creating the culture of the home, and that's something that is palpable. It can be felt. My kids and I have been doing a morning meeting every morning and talking over some things, and one of the things that we've been looking at is like our family vision, and in that family vision I use the word palpable. So we've been talking about like, what does palpable mean? Palpable means it can be felt. And so when you've got a vibrant and intentional mama, like you can feel that in the home. And when you think about how powerful that is and how meaningful that is to the humans that you're raising, that's a really, really big thing. And then, as I've talked about a number of times before, look at how much you grow as a human being through all of this. You know, you're doing, sorry, my notes are scrolling everywhere. You're doing all of the intellectual work. You're doing all of this planning, et cetera, et cetera. Lisa from Organize 365, which is like my probably number one favorite organization system at this point. I'll put her in the show notes too. She talks about like the unseen work of running the household. And she's talking about like all of these unseen tasks, like planning the appointments and this and that and the other, and just keeping everything running. Like she likes to make the unseen visible is kind of what she talks about. So anyways, there is just this unseen component to everything that you do, all of that practical unseen stuff, along with the spiritual unseen stuff that I was just talking about. Like all of that is causing you to grow. And the scope of the project is just vast when you think about going from pregnancy, where there's this little person in your belly and you're considering so many choices, to raising an infant and a toddler and a preschooler and like a primary schooler, and then a middle school, high school, secondary schooler, and then seeing them into adulthood. And parenting does not end when you have an adult child. You know, the scope is just so vast. Plus, you're working on you. I have made so many mistakes as a parent, and I've had to learn so much, and I still lose it sometimes, right? I don't tend to yell quite as much as I did, but there are times when, you know, mama's buttons will get pushed and I will just lose it. And I've had to say I'm sorry, and I've had to go and look at like, who do I want to be? Who do I want to become, so that I can help them become better people? Because like another goal in parenting is always, I want to create young people who are better than me, who have more opportunity than me, who have a more solid education, who are more intelligent than me, who this, that, and the other, right? You want to improve. You want to look back. This is something I feel like generations are perhaps missing today, is looking back with appreciation at what the generations before us did for us. And the fact that we are sitting here today is a reason to thank them for all of the hard work that they did, and think about what they strove for, the opportunities that they strove to give themselves and to give our grandparents and to give our parents and then to us. And we want to pass that on to our children. That is a really, really big thing. And so, you know, the scope is vast, and working on you so that you become better, so that you give them even more, so that they have greater opportunities in life. That's a really big thing. That's a really big thing. Now, I don't really think that I'm going to sell anyone on motherhood by saying that you're going to put decades into this project, and especially that you're not getting paid for that decades-long project, and that sacrificing so much is going to change you for the better. But I do believe that it's true. I do believe that even though this is work that you're not being paid for, it's going to take a lot of creativity, ingenuity, research, culture building, and growing as a person. You know, I believe it is going to change you for the better. I believe that it's true, even if those arguments aren't necessarily going to sell anybody on parenthood. Because not only will you gain so much in research, study, intention, you will get so much out of all of that. You will gain so much. You will gain the ability to try and look at all sides of things without bias. You will you will just gain so much. You're going to learn humility. You're going to learn empathy. You're going to learn some boundaries. I hope that you have some boundaries. That's another important lesson of motherhood. You're going to learn so much. And at the end of the day, you will have done something that's truly meaningful. You may have set aside some things, maybe a high salary, maybe travel, freedom, etc., because you've given another person, another human being, or maybe a couple of human beings, or a lot of human beings, a chance at life. And you've crafted an intentional home for them. And that is a powerful, profound gift. And as we know, it is truly the giver who receives from the gifts. Let's go over a couple caveats there, having said all that. I do think that as mothers, we really do have to hold lightly to the outcome, which is why I emphasized at the beginning and then again that our children are not the end result. We really have to hold lightly to the outcome, remembering that ultimately, just like we see parenting as our chance for growth and our chance to learn and develop, that our children are going to learn and develop, and they're going to grow as themselves. And we may hope that they come to the same conclusions as us. Maybe they maintain our belief system. I think it's silly today that many parents say, well, I want my child to make all of the decisions for themselves and I don't want to imprint my belief system on them, because what's going to happen is somebody is going to imprint their belief system on your child. And if you truly believe that your belief system offer something to your child, or if you have a faith-based perspective that says you believe this is truth, I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. And I also think that you can teach your child a belief system and also teach them. For example, I was listening to a podcast this morning where somebody was talking about, somebody had been talking about training toddlers, right? They were talking about kind of outlasting a toddler and getting the toddler to take a bite of food. And they were like, oh, they're just kind of this authoritarian and blah, blah, blah. And first of all, you're talking about toddlers. And sometimes you just have to lay down the law with the toddler, because many of you have seen households where the toddler is ruling the roost and the parents ain't happy and the toddler ain't happy, right? But I thought it was really funny that they were talking about like this person is kind of encouraging authoritarian ideologies and to follow the system. And then the person that they're talking about is like, he's completely bucked the system. He's said to a professional body, like, kind of F you, blah, 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 blah. And you see where his child, who is an adult now, because that's the other thing is like, these people who are talking have like toddlers and preschoolers, and they're talking about somebody who has an adult children, and it's like, well, look at the fruit, right? Look at the fruit of the adult children. But so I do think that it's important to say I have a value system, I have beliefs, and I want to teach that to my child and help shape my child in a way that I think is going to help them be emotionally healthy, pro-social, show gratitude, all those kinds of things. Don't shy away from those things, but do hold lightly to the outcome and give your child, especially as they are becoming a young adult, the space to step back away from the family, to test, to look, to explore. So hold lightly in that sense. And it's a balance. This is part of that growth that you do yourself between learning, like, what am I going to teach, and where am I going to say, you know what, I'm the mama and you need to listen to me, and where am I going to step back a little bit? And that's a lot of that is studying pedagogy, studying child rearing, looking at families who have children who have done well and asking them, well, how did you do it? Those are all questions to ask, and then to look at like what's going on with our culture and the values and kind of this cultural perspective that we've got, and how that can take children in, and kind of understanding all of that and looking at all of that. But ultimately hold lightly to your children, realizing that you can work hard to balance, but they are their own people. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we have to have boundaries. And you have to having boundaries also means being willing to do more than just love your children. There's a place for tough love and having boundaries and setting boundaries and that sort of thing. Like, for example, one of the things that was happening is I had a little one who was getting up early, and she'll come in my room when she gets up, which I don't necessarily mind, but she had gotten to the point where she was coming in my room really early, where I was still doing my quiet time, because every morning I spend some time in the scriptures, I do some praying, that sort of thing. And I need that time to be just for me. And so the kids already had these little alarm clocks that will glow green at a certain time in the morning to tell them when it's okay to get up. And I had that for set around 7 a.m. And I just wasn't able to get up as early as I was in the past. I needed to sleep a little bit more. Like in this season, I needed a little bit more sleep. And so I said, okay, I'm going to change the kitty clock because it's a cat. I was like, I'm going to change the kitty clock to 8 a.m. I said, you can get up at 7. You can play in your room. You can read a book. You can draw. You can play with your toys, whatever you want to do. But you've got to wait for kitty clock to turn green before you come into mom's room. And because she was already used to the concept of the kitty clock, she accepted that really easily. And I am so much happier because I'm always done with my quiet time before she comes in. So that was me setting a boundary that was helpful for me, and it's also helpful for her because it means when she comes in, she gets a smile from mom, or better yet, most mornings I'm already out working on their breakfast by the time she comes out at 8, and so she gets a smiling mom instead of a mom who's kind of like, why are you here so early? Right? So boundaries can really help our children. And of course, you always weigh those based on what your children need. Like, for example, when I have a nursing baby who is a young baby, I mean, my boundaries are relatively non-existent. That baby gets what that baby needs. That baby is always on me. But as your children grow, you set boundaries. And this is part of you examining your value system and what you feel is important and all of that. So boundaries are important. And I want to say that as moms, we do have to take care of ourselves because we have this dynamic life that is not just about our kids. Now, I will say that as a mom who's experienced having babies when I wasn't really working from home and having babies while I have been working from home and having babies where I feel like I have to be working because there's nobody else, it was much easier for me as a mother with babies and toddlers when I didn't have to be trying to balance other work. But I will say that even when I was a mother that wasn't balancing working from home, I wanted to do stuff for me. I was always studying and learning. Like, we go to the library and go to baby story time, and then I would check out a slew of books on topics that I was interested in. So I think that I think that even while you're mothering, you get to have a dynamic life. You get to learn and grow and be interested in things and engaged in your world, and bring your children along with you. If you're interested in herbs and you want to go on an herb walk, bring your kids along with you. If you want to make herbal tinctures, bring your kids along with you. If you're learning about essential oils or health or nutrition, include your child. I mean, we're about to repaint my house, and so you can bet that my children have been part of learning, how do we repair walls? How do we paint the house? How do we do this? We're hoping to move. That's why we're getting the house painted. They've been learning about, okay, what are things that we need to do and things that we need to take into account as we're preparing to move. So your learning adventures can become your children's adventures. But I mean, I enjoy researching about pregnancy and birth and mothering, and then I enjoy teaching about it. And I think that if you're doing some of that while you're mothering your children, that's okay. It's good for them to see that mom has a dynamic life. And maybe some of these, dissatisfied 1950s housewives didn't have anything else going on, though when you look at their lives, oftentimes they did have a lot going on. They were volunteering and doing other things. Like, there was a vibrant life outside of just mothering. So sometimes you wonder, did we just have a few really vocal, depressed housewives, but others were, they were making themselves busy with something else. So if it's okay if you've got other pursuits and interests as you're raising your kids. Bring them alongside of you, put them to bed and hit the books, whatever it is. So I think that you can have a dynamic life while you're mothering. But I also think I want you to look, in addition to that, at the dynamic life that you're going to have, the dynamic life that you're going to have beyond raising your children. You're gaining a lot of skills and a lot of growth. And those things can, it's kind of sequencing. We're going to talk about this more in a couple podcast episodes. You may be mothering intensely for a period, but that's definitely not a majority of your life. And so you're going to be able to move back into the working world, or working with foundations or nonprofits or whatever it is you want to do. And this skill set that you've got will really help. I did some contracting work at the beginning of the year with an entrepreneur, and I got that job because I've got a little bit of experience from running my own business. But what he really needed was project management tools, and those are what I've learned mothering a large family, and that's what he looked at. He didn't look at my degree or anything like that. He looked at my experience and my ability to sit down with him and say, let's mind map this out. Here's the action items. This is what you need to do. And that's skills I learned mothering. So realize you've got a life that's going to continue on past mothering your children. And that life can be a beautiful, vibrant life. And there are skills that you're learning now, connections that you can maintain over the years. I've got a cousin who's doing really well now that her kids are all grown, and when we're talking about it, and one of the things that she said is, I was careful to maintain connections, and that has really helped her to take off in a career now that her kids are grown. So work on those things. You can cultivate those things while you're mothering your children. And again, that holding lightly, and just understand, I guess what I'll end this on is that when you have children, the biggest thing is that your heart is always going to walk outside of your body, because it's always going to be with that child or those children in their many walks of life. And that will bring many times, if nothing brings you to your knees in prayer, probably it will be on your knees praying for your children, praying for yourself to be the mother for your children. And so there's always that. But I hope that I've helped you to see just how incredible and dynamic and vibrant this position of motherhood is, and how it may set aside that high-powered career for a time, but it will only enhance and benefit you, and you can slot back into that. And when you're on your deathbed, we'll go with that trope, and you look back over all that you've accomplished in life. Probably it's going to be the time and the love that you poured into your children that is what is going to come up in your heart. And the culture that you create, when it's a culture of love and raising healthy children who value family and who have strong family bonds, that's going to be who's surrounding you at those moments. It's not going to be coworkers. It's probably not going to be your adoring public. It's going to be those children that you sowed into, and just as they stand forth. It's like in Proverbs 31, as the children rise up and call you blessed, and recognize that. Adolescents may not recognize that, but oftentimes our adult children do. And so that is a project that is really valuable. The woman that you become, and how you allow that to shape you, and how you take hold of that and use your intelligence and your intention and your consciousness and your skills. That is what will bless you.